Hello, welcome to the first video for section 3 of the Bibble-IT training videos for the Microsoft exam for Windows 7. Today we're going to be having a look at how to configure drivers and devices in your system. This is part of the section for configuring hardware and applications. So what we're going to be looking at today is how to manage devices, how you can install devices. We're going to be talking about plug and play and non-plug and play, driver management, and lastly, quite an important one, driver signing. So a device manager, I'm sure you've all probably know where this is in the system, but there's three ways you can get into it. One via the control panel, under the hardware and sound menu. Second is via running the MMC command, which is dev-mgmt.msc, and thirdly by getting in through system management when you right click on my computer. That's the method I use, but it's personal preference. Inside Device Manager, you'll be able to see all the devices attached to your system and devices that have been installed but aren't currently connected. You can remote onto a machine to get access to its Device Manager. However, when you do that, it'll only be read-only. You won't be able to make any changes to a computer's hardware remotely. Any user, if they've got permissions to run MMC snap-ins, are able to open up Device Manager, but only administrators are able to change stuff. So just going to load up Device Manager now and show you what that looks like. So if we right click on my computer and manage, and then we can see in here, this is all the devices in my system. Currently they're sorted by type, but you can reorganize everything and show it by connection, in which case you can see as I drill down here, it's showing me stuff as they're attached via the bus. If we put it back to devices by type, so you can see in here I've got mice and keyboard, I've got my hard drive controllers that are part of the system. I've also got USB controllers. You get different things on the properties for all of these. If I open up the properties for my network card, under advanced you can see here I've got different options relating to my NIC. So in network address, I'd be able to put in specific values, or normally in here, you would have the options to set duplex, full duplex, half duplex, but it doesn't look like I've got them on this network card. Under driver, this is all the information about the driver that's currently loaded. We'll be coming back in here a little bit later on, but you can see who provides the driver, what date, what version, and who signed the driver as well. Details tab, we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here, as you can see from the drop down. So we've got device description, we've got all sorts of IDs that relate to the hardware, and what resources it's using in the system. As I said, some of these tabs depend on what the hardware is. Sometimes you'll also find a power management tab here, which lets you specify things like allow this device to be shut to wake the system up when it's been suspended, those sorts of things. Quite a handy one. Under my USB controllers down here, I've got the USB hubs attached to my system. I don't have any USB devices in here, and these hubs don't have anything on them because this is a virtual machine. But if I bring up the properties over here, you can see under power, and this gives me a list of attached devices. In fact, what I'll do is I'll show you the one from my computer, so bear with me. Okay, here we go. This is one of the hubs that I've got on my machine, and you can see here I've got two devices plugged into it. I've got 500 milliamps of power available through this USB port, or hub, sorry, which is a USB hub on the motherboard, which might have 2 or 3 actual ports that you can connect things into. I've got my mouse connected into one, and I've also got a USB composite device. This is really handy if you ever plug something in and you get the message saying, device is unable to start, it hasn't got enough hardware. This is where you can come and see and work out what you would need to move around on your system to be able to power the device properly. So he also mentions that you're able to show hidden devices. To enable that, if you do view and then show hidden devices, you should be able to see there I've got a whole bunch of other stuff as now displaying things like non-plug and play drivers, etc. This one's quite important if you've done, say, a P2V, where you've converted a physical machine into a virtual machine. When it gets virtualized, all the hardware will be different, but that doesn't mean it's actually uninstalled from the system. It's still present, it's just not being used. So you come in here, enable hidden devices, and then you're able to remove and tidy up all the things. Not something you'll probably come across that often with Windows 7 itself, however. Okay, back to the slides. Installing new devices. You've probably come across the term plug and play. Almost all new hardware is plug-and-play compatible. That means it's got a set way of initializing and identifying itself to the Windows system, or not even Windows, to Mac, Linux, or whatever the operating system is. Windows behavior when you plug a plug-and-play device in is it'll automatically go away and start searching for a driver to try and initialize the hardware. If you don't want it to do that, you can change the default behavior using group policy. The process to start with is it will automatically search for the driver. The default path is C Windows System 32 drivers. After it finds a driver, it will then automatically initialize the hardware. If it doesn't find a driver, it will go away and ask if it can look on Windows Update. You are able to change the default behavior for that if you want to. The options you get, you can search Windows Update, don't bother trying to install any new hardware, or only check Windows Update if you can't find a driver locally. To change the behavior for that, if we click on our Start menu and then start typing Change Device Installation Settings, you can see here I can say, yes, do this automatically, and it'll try the local machine, then Windows Update, or I can say, no, I want you to never bother installing stuff from Windows Update if you've had bad experiences, or if you're corporate IT and you've already put the right drivers on the machine. Or we've got here, install drivers only if you don't find anything on my local machine. Oops, it appears to have moved the slides on. So non-plug-and-play devices, you have to start and add a new hardware wizard, which you do from the device manager. So if we go back into device manager, and this time we right-click on the top level and we do add legacy hardware. This brings up the wizard. If we click on next, we've got the option to search and identify any hardware automatically, or we can go straight ahead and say, I know what I've got and I want to choose it from a list. So this time we'll just do search. You can see it runs through the machine, hasn't found anything. Click on next, and then we get the option to choose what type of device it is we're going to say we're installing. In my case, let's pretend we're installing a modem. Now, chances are, because Windows didn't find this automatically for us the first time, we've got two choices. We can either let it run through, or most likely what we want to do is don't detect automatically. We'll add the hardware ourselves. Click on next, and it goes away and generates a big long list of all the modems that it knows about. So you can see here, these are all the things that are built into Windows. If we click on Have Disk, we've then got the option to browse our hard drive and choose the .inf file that was most likely supplied by the vendor. The other option, instead of having to use the Add Hardware wizard, is of course that you use the media that came with your device, your CD or memory card or whatever it was the vendor provided. So that's how we add non-plug-and-play devices. Hopefully nowadays you won't have to do that too often because everything's plug and play, and in theory they should all play nicely together now. So device staging. We mentioned on the previous slide that there was the path C Windows System 32 drivers that the system will check for install files for any new hardware. By default, non-administrators are allowed to install devices if the driver exists on the system and it's valid. By valid, I mean if it's been signed, that it's been signed by a trusted publisher. Now, you can control this behavior through group policy, and you can also add in your own locations for Windows to search. So if you're corporate IT, you might want to specify a folder on the local drive that you pre-created when you built the images, which contains all the possible printer drivers that exist in your organization if you've got any bizarre printers that need adding in locally, that sort of stuff. So to have a look in group policy, if we open up GPEdit, then expand computer configuration, administrative templates, system, and then driver installation. We've got these two settings here. Allow non-administrators to install drivers for these device setup classes. If we open that up and enable it, what we're going to be able to do in here is provide it with a GUID that represents the type of device that we want non-administrators to be able to install by default. So if we click on Show, you might well be asking, well, where on earth am I going to get this GUID from? Well, that's where Device Manager comes back in. So if we go back into Device Manager, and I know we'll use our network card again. If we bring up the properties for that, into Details, and scroll down, we should have Device Class GUID here as one of the options. We can copy that, paste it into our window in our local group policy. OK, and apply that. Now what that means is that any user who tries to install a device that shares that same class will be allowed to do it without having to provide administrative privileges. So I'm just going to disable that before I forget and mess up my virtual machine. We've also got the option here to turn off the Windows Update device prompt if that's something that you don't want your users to be doing. The other thing I mentioned on the slide was the ability to specify additional search paths. If we open up the registry by typing regedit and a run prompt, and then expanding the path, which is local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows current version, we've got this key here. This is a string value called device path. If we want to add another path in here, we can put a semicolon and then do C or wherever your path is. And that will automatically now be included in any searches for drivers by the system. Okay, so what sort of things might you want to be able to do with your devices? Well, we might want to update our drivers to make sure that we're running the latest version. You might find that some of these will be picked up and applied automatically when you put your machine through a Windows update cycle. If we've installed a new driver and it's caused problems for our system, Windows has the capability of allowing you to automatically roll back to a previous version of the driver that you were using. Or if things have gone really wrong, we might want to completely uninstall and remove our driver. Speaking of device conflicts, they should be fairly rare for plug-and-play devices these days. I mean, fair enough, plug-and-play when it was new, there were quite a lot of issues with it. But nowadays, everything should be reasonably stable and play quite nicely together. If you do have any issues with plug-and-play devices, you'll want to disable the device or uninstall and then allow Windows to reinstall it. If they're non-plug-and-play devices, we might need to force disabling the device or stopping it while we try and work out what's causing the issue, and then we can try and re-enable it again. So all of these things are done through Device Manager again. If we go back into Device Manager and bring up the properties for our network card, under Driver here, we've got the option to update the driver, and it will ask me, well, how do I want to do that? Do I want to search automatically against Microsoft Windows Update, or do I want to browse my computer for a file that I've already downloaded? If I click on Browse, I get the choice to specify a folder location, and I can include subfolders in that search as well. Or I might want to go ahead and say, well, let me pick what device I want to install for this. Sometimes, say things like graphics cards, you might want to force it to use an older version of a driver if you're getting glitches in a particular game or any sorts of issues like that. By default, what Windows will do here, if you allow it with this first option, is it will choose whatever it thinks is the newest, best fit for your machine. So if we say no down here, we've got the option, much like we did with the Add Legacy Hardware wizard, to click on Have Disk and specify our own location, our own file for what we want to install. Also, if we untick the Show Compatible Hardware button, what Windows is trying to do is it's trying to show drivers that only say they support your specific type of hardware. Now, in some circumstances, you might want to force a piece of hardware to use a different driver. This is how you'd do it. You'd untick that, choose whatever it was you wanted, and apply that. If you did that and it all goes horribly wrong, you've got the option down here of doing a rollback on your device. If you click on that, Windows will automatically restore it to whatever the previous version of the driver was you had in the system. As I mentioned again, if things went completely wrong, then what you can do is uninstall the device and make sure you start again fresh whenever you reattach it into the system. This is where the driver details tab can come in quite handy. If you uninstall the device driver, I should clarify this. If you uninstall the device from your system, it doesn't necessarily remove the drivers from the system. If you click on driver details up here, you'll be able to see what the file is that it's using for this particular hardware device. In my case, all of these devices are using the built-in Windows drivers, so I really don't want to be coming in here and deleting this device through File Explorer or something, so don't do that, only if you really know what you're doing. But this can be quite helpful because it tells you who it was that provided the driver, what version it was, and who the signer was for it. If this is a non-plug and play, I might want to disable my device. I'm not going to do that because that means that this will stop talking with the rest of the network. For non-plug and play devices in here, you'll also have the option of setting their startup type. Normally it's automatic, but if it's something you don't want to start up every time you turn your machine on, you're able to disable a device completely by saying don't bother trying to initialize this hardware at all. Okay, so if you're really struggling with conflicts in your system, there's a few tools that you can run to try and help you resolve the issues. The first one is MS Info 32. This is provided with Windows. In fact, all of these tools are. This one will let you list out the drivers that are being used by devices in your system. It'll let you list out devices and what system resources they're sharing. And probably easiest if I show you. So if we click on Start and then run MS Info 32. If we expand hardware resources and have a look at conflicts and sharing, you can see here these are all the system resources, so things like memory, IRQs that are allocated to devices in my system. Again, because this is a VM, I don't have any, that much in here, but you'd be able to identify if you've got a particular piece of hardware, what system resources it's possibly having conflicts with. Also, under software environment, another one that's quite handy, we've got this system drivers option, which lists out all the drivers that are being used in the machine. I think they're mainly kernel level drivers. Now again, it'll tell you, you can see here I've got two different types. It'll tell you if the driver's started and what startup mode it's running in. So you can see in here there's quite a lot of handy bits and pieces for if you're doing any troubleshooting. Next up is a tool called Verifier. The Verifier is something that you probably won't need to use day to day. It's something really designed for developers who are putting together their own bits of hardware. Verifier is a command line tool. So if we run Verifier again from here. In fact, no, sorry, it used to be a command line tool and now it's got this graphical interface on it. We've got a bunch of options. I'm not really going to cover what this tool does in any great detail, other than saying it stress tests drivers on your system. You can see if we click through here, we're going to say automatically pick our unsigned drivers. In fact, we're going to select driver names from a list. It's going to go through, pick up a list of devices that we want to test out properly. We'll pick the first two and click on Finish. When we click on Finish, it's going to warn us that it's going to reboot our computer, do a bunch of tests, and then provide us back with some information. So we're going to cancel out of that and not run it right now. For the purposes of the exam, I'd be very surprised if they ask you any in-depth questions about Verifier. In fact, you probably won't ever see anything about it again, or hopefully not. If you do come up against it, just remember the Verifier is a tool and it's used to try and help resolve driver conflicts or to try and diagnose dodgy hardware in your system. There's a few more tools that we'll talk about in a second. Most of them these two are actually both relating to driver signing. Driver signing, as you saw when I had some of the bits of hardware open, is where the bit of software that runs the hardware has been signed as being okay by a source. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's been signed by Microsoft. It might not be signed by whoever your hardware provider is. But it's like with websites, when you go to an SSL website for your bank, that's been signed as being trusted and valid by some sort of publisher out on the internet, normally the likes of VeriSign, CompuSec, those types of people. The same thing applies with drivers. All devices that come into your system, most of the time they will have a signed driver. If they don't, Windows will prompt you for them. And in fact, on 64-bit Windows, you have to have signed drivers even if you're trying to install something as an administrator. I believe there's a group policy setting you can change to turn that off, but you really probably wouldn't want to be messing around with that. It doesn't have to be signed by any of these high-level providers as long as the appropriate certificate is in the trusted publisher certificate store for your computer. To show you where that store is, if we open up a blank MMC snap-in and then add in the certificate snap for the local computer, these are all the certificate stores on your machine. So you can see down here, we would need to have the certificate present in trusted publishers. If we were signing our own drivers and trying to distribute them around all of your computers on your domain, you'd need to make sure you had the appropriate signature in here. Signature certificate. So to check if all the drivers in your system are signed or not, there's two tools you can use. The first one is DXDiag. This will check for signed drivers, but only for DirectX hardware. DirectX hardware is Microsoft's standard, much like there was OpenGL, around which things like the Quake 2 engine ran on. DirectX is Microsoft's equivalent specification for multimedia devices. So if we run DXDiag from our from our start prompt, it's going to say, I'm going to go ahead and check all of the devices in your system are digitally signed, but this is only checking DirectX hardware. If we click on OK there, you can see it's going to run through, and we'll hopefully end up with a report at the other side. So you can see here, under my display, sound, inputs, I've not got any problems with signed devices on my system. You can save all that out if you want to for reference or for use later on. The other tool that's probably going to be more helpful to you is SIG Verify. This will search all other devices in your system, excluding DirectX devices. So SIG Verify, there we go, sigverif.exe. Run that. We're going to say advanced. We'll specify where it's going to log our report to. Click on OK, run that through, and then it's telling us that everything in our system is currently OK and signed. If we click on Advanced, we can then go in and view our log file, and it just produces out a nice list, again, something that we can use for further troubleshooting if we needed to. So before we come to the end of this section, there was one other thing that I wanted to include, which was some further group policy options. If we go back into our group policy editor and look at device installation, these are all the things that we can control around what pop-ups the user sees, how long the system waits and tries to look for devices. Under device installation restrictions, sorry, I should have said this is where the same place we were before, computer admin template system, and then instead of driver installation, this time it's device installation. But in here, we're able to specify if we want to override the ability to install removable devices, so things like memory sticks. Or external hard drives. Do we want to prompt with custom messages? Do we want to prevent installation of certain devices on our system? This is again where we'd be able to put those GUIDs in that we could get from Device Manager. So in your day-to-day use, you probably won't need to come across this an awful lot, but if you're an IT admin for a large organization and you're really locking down your workstations, you might want to prevent people from installing different bits of kit, but you might want to allow people to install things like certain printers. This is where you could come in here and customize all of those options. So, a quick summary of the stuff we've talked about. What permissions or privileges you need to be able to install drivers. By default, users will be able to install new hardware as long as the device already exists on the system and that it's the driver is signed and valid. We can control all those things through group policy. We're able to add in our own paths to the driver search locations that Windows checks. There's a few tools we can use to check some information about our drivers. There was MSInfo32, there was Verifier, there was DirectX Diag, DX Diag, and there was SIG Verif for driver signing. And lastly, driver signing was the ability for you to sign off that the bit of code that controls your hardware is valid. Normally, your drivers will be signed for you by whoever it is that publishes them, and in 64-bit Windows, all drivers have to be signed. So thank you very much for watching, and please feel free to, as always, leave me some feedback on the website. Thank you very much.